Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another one of our weekly webinars on growing drought-resistant crops, presented by Advancing Eco-Agriculture. I'm David Miller, leader of the Plant and Soil Health Consultant team. I've been working with Advancing Eco-Agriculture from its first days in 2009, and I'm very, very excited about the things that are happening in the food production arena. Very exciting when you follow all the things that are happening. There's a lot of negative things happening, but there's also many, many positive things happening. So very exciting. Glad to have all of you on the call today. It surely is a pleasure to be with you, and look forward for the next hour spent together. So the reason that we're here today, and the reason that Advancing Eco-Agriculture exists, is because at Advancing Eco-Agriculture, we believe that food should be more than just food. It should be of such a quality that when it is consumed, it really is medicine. It becomes more than just something that will sustain our body. It will be something that will actually heal our body. So we also believe that it's both the farmer's responsibility and a privilege to grow the healthiest food possible. And we're here to help farmers do just that. At Advancing Eco-Agriculture, our team is a group of innovative and highly trained soil and plant health specialists. This team was founded and is led by an irreverent young Amishman by the name of John Kempf. And for those of you who don't yet know John, or the significance that he has in the agriculture industry, I would like to take this opportunity to tell you just a little bit more about him. John grew up on his family's vegetable farm and was given the responsibility of crop production at a very young age, 16 actually, I believe it was. John began questioning this theory of that killing insects is really the best way to produce food. And after years of going through his own set of trials, he came across a discovery which started when they bought a new tract of land, changed the direction of the rows, and saw that there is such a thing as healthy and unhealthy plants growing right beside each other. And so John started the journey of learning how to grow healthy plants that are resistant to insects, resistant to diseases, and less affected by the vagaries of the weather, such as droughting or extreme moisture times. And that is how Advancing Eco-Agriculture got started. So now John is recognized internationally as a leader and an authority who has a renowned gift to clearly understand the many intricacies and the interrelationships between the soil and plant health. John's clear and concise way of explaining these complex things of nature and the way nature has designed for growing healthy plants has made John a highly sought after speaker and teacher on the subject. John's passion for improving the quality of food we eat and for the food that we feed to our neighbors really sets him apart as a crusader for quality crop production. So if you've not met John, look forward to the day when you'll be able to meet him. For those of you who have met him, you know what I'm talking about. So we are very lucky to have him here leading our team at Advancing Eco-Agriculture. I am honored to be on that team and feel very privileged to introduce him to you today. So without any further waiting, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce you to John Kempf, the founder and leader of Advancing Eco-Agriculture. Carry on, John.
Thank you, David. Thanks for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. What we want to talk about today is what the possibilities are for producing healthy, high quality crops in drought conditions. And there's a variety of factors that have a very significant influence in helping plants be able to resist not only drought stress, but all different types of stress. And throughout all of the different stress factors, we can have many different types of stress. We can have insect stress, we can have um, disease exposure, or we can have moisture stress, or we have too much moisture, not enough moisture, too much sunshine, high temperatures. There's many different types of stress that plants can be exposed to. But what I find quite interesting is that all of these stress factors can be effectively buffered or negated by plants by some very fundamental and the same fundamental principles across the board for all the different types of stress influences. I'd like to learn a little bit more about those of you who are on the call today. Um, we will be sending out a poll on what types of crops that you're producing and how much of those crops that you might be producing in different regions. And if you could fill those out and send those back to us, that would be much appreciated. And we'll know a little bit more about who our audience is. Um, as we look at drought stress, one of the common symptoms of drought stress or any types of stress really are that plants, as plants become stressed, what is happening inside that plant, in the plant leaf, is the cells, first the cells begin losing moisture. And as they begin losing moisture, begin dehydrating, the cell chemistry is no longer able to function nearly as well as it should. And that as that plant begins wilting, photosynthesis begins shutting down, and all the different plants' various chemical processes shut down. So if we can avoid that process from happening, if we can prevent that process from happening, those plants will continue to grow, to photosynthesize efficiently, still be healthy, even in low moisture conditions. So, good. Thanks for responding to the poll. It looks like we have, of the people that responded to the poll, we have the majority are fruits and vegetables and diversified farms, which we like to see. We have 29%, which are fruit and vegetable crops. And then we have 29%, which are diversified farms, where they're producing fruits, vegetables, perhaps broadacre crops, and perhaps livestock as well. 29%, which are producing other crops, and 14%, which are growing broadacre crops, corn, soybeans, and so forth. So thanks for responding to that. I appreciate it. And we just sent another poll, which is how large is your farm? How large is the operation that you are running? Are you doing 100 acres or more than 100 acres? Some of those. Good. It looks like we have 100% that are smaller than 100 acres, which is quite interesting and quite encouraging as well. At Advancing Eco-Agriculture, if we go back to our first slide, we say that our mission is to provide products, information, products, and services to regenerate agrarian culture and help people grow the best food possible. And I use the words agrarian culture very intentionally because we I believe that the future of food production, producing high quality food, is really a function of people having a close connection to the land. And that valuing that connection to the land and that agrarian culture is going to enable us to produce higher quality food simply because we care more about our actions with the soil and with the land. So that's very important. So I described very briefly the different keys or what is happening inside the plant. What happens inside the plant in drought conditions is that first we have dehydration, and as that dehydration progresses, the cells become we get a drop in turgor pressure in the cells. They have lower moisture content, and the cell biochemistry reactions and biochemistry processes really begin slowing down. So as those processes slow down, the plants can no longer photosynthesize efficiently. They're no longer producing the right types of compounds, and consequently, the cells become even weaker. So when we look at some of the keys to the big picture pieces to how we can prevent this process from happening, there's really three big pieces that can help plants be healthy enough to tolerate these stress factors and not show any negative side effects. So in these three keys, the first that we have, can
What's the challenge, John?
you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, good. My webinar session's giving me a little bit of a problem here. Can you see the leave webinar on the screen? Shared screen?
I see lipid formation.
Okay, great, thanks. So, of these three keys, one of the most important ones, and there's several foundational ones that help us get to this point, but lipid formation inside the plant is really critical. And what we're describing here is that lipids, plant fats, are really to form the cell membrane. We talked about cells dehydrating, and to prevent that, we need a strong, healthy cell membrane. That cell membrane is going to be composed of a phospholipid layer, or a dual phospholipid layer, where we have a layer of phospholipids on the inside of the cell membrane, a layer of phospholipids on the outside of the cell membrane. Sandwiched between those two, we have a layer of calcium pectates. And as long as we have good lipid formation, if we have a healthy plant that has elevated levels of lipid formation, we'll have much thicker, stronger cell membranes that will not dehydrate nearly as readily. And so we prevent a good deal of moisture loss by having strong lipid formation right at the beginning throughout the entire growing season. The second very critical point is having microbial symbiosis. And the key here is in soil microbiology. And when I'm talking about microbial symbiosis here, I'm referring specifically to symbiotic relationships with soil microorganisms, even though plants also have symbiotic relationships with microorganisms living on the leaf surface, and that is very important. The microbial population in the rhizosphere, or in the soil, is very critical for helping plants achieve drought tolerance by providing nutrients and providing water that the plant cannot access by itself just with a native root system. And the third, of course, is having a large and strong root system. And that foundation is really built in having strong photosynthesis. The reality, though, the foundation of all of these three different pieces really is mineral nutrition. And providing adequate, there's obviously a lot of complex interactions happening here, but providing adequate mineral nutrition is really the foundation that allows these other three pieces to function and to produce a healthy, high quality plant. So, stress factors, whether they be drought, moisture stress, insects, diseases, whatever the case might be, always equal a loss of production. And this loss of production, if we look at what causes this loss of production, what is the root cause of stress? The root cause of stress can be insects, it can be diseases, it can be moisture stress. But as I will describe in more detail, mineral nutrition is really the foundation that allows these stress influences to have an impact on plants. So when we look at overall production and the impact that that stress has, we typically think of stress influence in terms of yield loss. And when we think of yield, we typically think of yield in terms of bins and bushels, reduction of bins and bushels per acre. I think we also need to begin considering some quality factors in our considerations, and not only looking at bins and bushels, but also looking at quality, especially in terms of density or test weight and protein content. Those are very important. I should also mention that if at any time during this presentation, if you want to ask me any questions, you can type in a question and send that over to us, or you can also raise your hand. There's a small icon which you can use to raise your hand, and then we'll respond to you and unmute you on the system so that you can ask any questions that you might like. Um, so in addition to yield, we also need to look at quality indicators. If we look at what yield potentials are, consultants, geneticists, plant breeders tell us that we are routinely harvesting only a very small percentage of what our plant's inherent genetic potential is. So corn, for example, we know that all the corn genetics available in the marketplace today have the genetic capacity to produce 1,100 bushel per acre. And in fact, some geneticists contend that most corn genetics have the capacity to produce more than 1,100 bushel per acre. While meantime, in the Midwest, we are routinely harvesting 180 to 190 bushels per acre, only a very small percentage of that overall genetic capacity. If we look at soybeans, soybeans have the genetic capacity to produce 600 bushel per acre, while we are routinely harvesting 47 to 50 bushel per acre as a Midwestern average. If we look at these yield potentials, we can see that we're only harvesting a very small percentage of what our genetic potential is. And the reason is that those plants are throughout the entire growing season experiencing small amounts of stress. So if we look at soybean or sweet corn as an example, when sweet corn is being grown on bare ground, planted similar to field corn, we're typically harvesting about 800 to 1,000 dozen per acre. Really good harvest is about 1,000 dozen per acre. However, we take that same plant population per acre and we plant it on plastic with drip irrigation, and we can practically double that yield to about 1,600 dozen per acre. So the only reason that is happening is because we are reducing a lot of the stress. We're taking away a lot of the different stress factors throughout the growing season. As you can see on this corn plant in the photo, this is actually a field corn plant that this farm has been in our program for 2 years. And so this plant was at the edge of a field, and the plants on both sides were missing, so it had more of an opportunity. But on this plant, we have 4 fully matured ears, and we have 1 ear at the bottom that was formed but is not fully matured. Typically, when we dissect a corn plant vertically, we will find on most corn plants 7 embryos, a minimum of 7 embryos, occasionally more. So the plant is telling us it has the genetic capacity, given the proper environment, to produce 7 fully matured ears per plant. The only limiting factor is nutrition and stress, which is based on nutrition. So the question then becomes is why do we experience these large yield variations and why do we experience these large levels of yield loss? The reality is that genetic potential, the potential of that plant, is determined by the seed before that seed is ever planted. Luther Burbank has a very good quote in which he states that heredity is nothing more than stored environment. So the seed that we plant it's not about having the latest, greatest, most perfect genetics. It's about how that seed was produced and how that seed was grown. It becomes a very critical factor. This leads to the science of epigenetics. So epigenetics is really a godchild, if you will, of the science of genetics. 20 years ago, genetics was the latest and greatest science, and we were going to be able to cure all of our diseases, many diseases, degenerative diseases such as heart disease, stroke, cancer, and so forth, by understanding genetics. And as we learned more about genetics, and we learned that we didn't really know what we thought we knew, then the genetics, that led to the science that was termed epigenetics, which basically states that in a nutshell, epigenetics can be summed up with 4 words, which states that environment determines genetic expression. And the meaning of environment determines genetic expression basically means that the DNA is the blueprint. we can have the blueprint designed to build a really strong, sturdy house, really strong, sturdy frame. But if weak materials are used or some materials are not available, then the blueprint is not followed completely, but weaker materials are substituted. Instead of using 2x10s, we use 2x8s. Instead of using 10 penny nails, we use 8 penny nails. The result is a much weaker structure. And the same holds true of plants. We have a strong blueprint, we have the DNA, we have the genetic opportunity. But if we don't provide that plant with the materials and the nutrition that it needs to work with to build that frame, we're not going to harvest that plant's genetic capacity or that yield potential. So if we look at corn as an example, the day the corn seed is planted, we know we have the opportunity to produce 1,100 bushel per acre. Perhaps the seed was planted in soil that was too cold and wet, planted too deep, nutrients not placed properly. Every time we have a stress influence on that plant, we're reducing that plant's genetic potential to the point at which we're finally harvesting. We're harvesting only a very small percentage of what we originally started with. So the question this leads to the thought that when we get a yield response from something that we have done, whether it be applying a pesticide or applying a fertilizer, cultivating, whatever the case might be, when we get a yield response from something that we have done, the reality is that we have not increased yields. What we have simply done is we have kept those yields from being lost. So this leads to a concept that I referred to as a critical point of influence. And as I began looking at the different stress points on plants and when plants were having a lot of stress, I quickly saw that there were different stages in the plant's reproductive cycles at which any stress potential was going to have a significant impact on yield. So if we look at corn as an example, this is research that was done at Iowa State University, and they determined that from 9 to 12 days after germination, that corn plant is determining the number of ears that it could potentially have. 14 to 21 days after germination is determining the number of rows that it could potentially have, and then 42 to 49 days after germination is determining the number of kernels per row that it could potentially have. I find several points quite interesting about this research. The first is the narrowness of the windows. If you skip, like on the 9 to 12 day window, that is what I refer to as a critical point of influence. Any stress potential at that time is going to greatly weaken that plant's yield potential, whether it be drought stress, moisture stress, whatever the case might be. And then the other thing that I find really interesting is the greatest level of yield potential is determined earliest in the plant's life. If you can influence the number of ears, you can have a whole lot greater impact on the level of yield than you can if you influence the number of kernels in the 42 to 49 day period. So if we want to reduce yield loss, the key to reducing yield loss is simply to reducing stress at these critical points of influence, whether that be drought stress, moisture stress, disease and insect pests, anything that we have the influence or the capacity to influence. To reduce stress at these periods can have a significant response. So we have four major critical points of influence. You have planting and transplanting, filling plant frame, filling fruit, and finishing fruit. And the major one is planting and transplanting stage. The majority of yield loss happens at this stage of plant growth. I would say of the many different crops that I've worked with, for many crops, as much as 60 to 65% of the total yield loss that happens throughout the entire growing season happens in the first 2 weeks of a plant's life, for a couple of different reasons. The first is that the smaller a plant is, the more of an impact any stress potential is going to have. And also, as I referred to earlier on the corn example, for many plants, the greatest level of yield potential is determined earliest in the plant's life. The second stage is when plants begin sizing rapidly and initiating reproduction. This is what I call building plant frame. For many plants, this is when they've been planted for about 6 or 8 weeks, and they've established a strong root system. And once they begin building plant frame, the plant frame begins sizing very, very rapidly. And we have requirements for a good deal of nutrition, especially calcium and other nutrients, to establish strong cell membranes, make sure that we have good cell membrane integrity throughout the entire plant. The second or the third stage is when plants really become when we begin filling fruit. At this stage, the fruit becomes the primary sugar sink inside the plant. And when the fruit becomes the primary sugar sink, we have three sugar sinks. You have the new growth at the top of the plant, you have the root growth, and then you have the fruit. And the fruit are different from the other sugar sinks in that the fruit are a storage organ. So they store sugars, they store potassium and other nutrients, and now we have very large requirements for strong photosynthesis inside that plant. The fourth stage is finally when we begin finishing fruit. And here the key is that we need proper fruit fill and proper maturity. I'm really describing the difference between die down and dry down, which is a conversation in and of itself. But healthy plants will still be green, have vigorous vitality, and have fully matured and dry ears and dry grain and matured fruit, whatever the case might be of the crop that we're talking about. So the key is that plant nutritional supplements applied at the critical points of influence can not only greatly reduce stress, but they can also enhance immunity simply because they are providing the mineral nutrition that is the foundation of increasing tolerance to stress. So the foundation, the root cause of stress on all these various stress factors is inadequate mineral nutrition. It's not drought stress from water. It's not stress from insects. Those are only symptoms. They're symptoms of a root cause, and the root cause is really not having strong mineral nutrition to form strong and adequate cell membranes. So the foundation of plant health and overall performance really begins in the photosynthetic process. In the photosynthetic process, we basically have plants that are absorbing water from the soil, carbon dioxide from the air, and through the catalytic action of sunlight energy, they are combining to form glucose and releasing oxygen back into the air. So this results in the formation of glucose, which is a simple carbohydrate monosaccharide molecule titled C6H12. So think of a short chain that has 24 links, 6 links of carbon, 12 links of hydrogen, and 6 links of oxygen. So I point that out because sugars, glucose, contains no minerals. There is no calcium, no potassium, no magnesium in sugars, and that's a very important point. This glucose produced during photosynthesis is the foundational building block that's used to build all the rest of the plant's compounds. So we have 4 primary groups of compounds. You have the carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, plant secondary metabolites. For this conversation, we're going to focus on the third group, which are the lipids, which are key to having strong cell membranes, which do not lose moisture nearly as readily. So in the lipids are inside the plant are essentially energy storage. So exactly the same way, if you have an animal that is getting more feed and more energy than it requires, it will store that surplus energy in the form of fats. Well, plants do the same thing. If plants have a surplus of energy, they will begin storing that energy as lipids or as plant fats. And that storage, those lipids, then become deposited in the cell membrane. So to form the cell membrane layer, you have on the inside of the cell, you have a layer of lipids. On the outside of the membrane, you have a layer of lipids. Sandwiched between those two layers, you have a layer of calcium pectate. And essentially, what will happen is as the plants become healthier and they begin building higher levels of lipids, the cell membrane becomes much thicker, much stronger. You have a much thicker lipid membrane. And that lipid membrane enables that plant that cell to not lose moisture. It doesn't lose moisture nearly as quickly, nearly as rapidly. And now, since it has that barrier, that buffer, and won't dehydrate as quickly, the plant overall will not dehydrate, and it will continue to function and grow even in very low moisture conditions. So putting all of this together into a practical farming system, farming operation, we really need to begin thinking of our farms as an overall system where everything is interconnected to everything else. And I use the analogy of a spider web. Any single thing that we do on our farms, whether it might be tillage practices or the type of water that we're applying or foliar applications, whatever the case might be, anytime we touch or move one part of that web, the entire web moves and changes. Sometimes drastically, sometimes less so. But every single thing that we do is going to have an impact on that overall system. And it's very important to begin thinking of this as a system. And I'll explain in a moment why that is. But thinking in systems is really the realization that everything is connected to everything else. And any single thing that you do on your operation is going to have an impact, perhaps unanticipated and unexpected impacts in other areas of the operation. One of the key concepts here is that soil is the plant's digestive system. We couldn't imagine a dairy cow or a ruminant animal existing without a rumen, which is that cow's digestive tract. In the same way, we can't have a healthy plant without a functioning soil digestive system. They are that closely and that strongly integrated and connected to each other. In turn, plants then also feed soil microbiology. So we have this symbiotic relationship working back and forth in which the soil provides nutrition to the plants and plants also feed soil biology. What this looks like is that throughout the plant's total life cycle, 70% of total plant photosynthates are sent out through the root system to feed soil microbiology. And that quote is from Horst Marschner in his book titled Mineral Nutrition and Higher Plants, second edition. 70% of total plant photosynthate. So what that means is that's a very large number. That means if we have 100 pounds of plant biomass above ground, there is also 100 pounds of root biomass below ground, and yet that total of 200 pounds represents only 30% of what that plant produced. That means there are an additional 460 pounds in the soil system as root exudates. That will only happen if we have a plant that has a surplus of energy, that has more energy than it needs for its own requirements. Today there are basically two different models of plant nutrition. We have the first model is that of, and the accepted model today is that of plants absorbing their nutrition as simple ions from the soil solution, where we basically have the soil as a hydroponic medium supporting the plant roots, and the plant is intended to absorb potassium ions, nitrogen ions, calcium ions from the soil solution. It's not real-world agriculture. I refer to this as glorified hydroponics. Really healthy plants do not function this way. In this model of simple ions, soil moisture significantly affects nutrient availability because we're basically describing ions that need to be soluble in the soil solution, meaning soluble in a water solution. So what this means is that as soon in a drought stress situation, as soon as the water disappears, the nutrition disappears as well. As soon as you don't have water, you don't have nutrient availability anymore. That's key. The second model, the real-world model of plant nutrition, is that of plants absorbing their nutrition as microbial metabolites. And absorbing their nutrition as microbial metabolites, what we're describing here is that we have this total soil microbial system functioning where you have bacterial populations, fungal populations, nematodes, protozoa, actinomycetes. You have all these different microbes cycling generations in the soil system as they feed on and digest root exudates and other organic residues in the soil profile. What really happens here, if you remember my earlier comment that root exudates, sugars, so these root exudates that these plants are exuding are primarily sugars, some amino acids, and some lipids, along with a variety of other complex compounds, the plant secondary metabolites. But in general, these compounds do not contain minerals. They are very heavily, there's a lot of sugars. Majority of the root exudates are in the form of sugars and amino acids. And sugars do not contain minerals. Sugars don't contain calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and so forth. So, and yet microbes need these elements to form their own bodies. So as they digest the sugars being released from the root exudates, they actually will absorb nutrients tied up in the soil mineral matrix and make them available and utilize them to build their own bodies. Then as their bodies cycle through generational cycles, the nutrients that were contained in their bodies are now bonded with amino acids and organic acids and essential fatty acids and released back into the soil system, where they can now be reabsorbed by plants. So plants are really absorbing these microbial metabolites, which are now combined with minerals. And this is a very important process for plants to get to a very high level of energy, because now they don't have to expend nearly as much energy in processing minerals that they absorb in the form of simple ions. So another significant key for disease or for drought tolerance is that soil biology can access water and nutrient reserves which are not available to plant roots by themselves. So if we look at water concentrations in soil, if we just had plant roots and root hairs by themselves, they can extract water that is held in the soil aggregate crumb structure and on the soil colloids down to about 65 to 70% wet, 65 to 70% moisture content in the soil. So they can get, if the soil is perfect, if the soil is saturated, in other words, at 100% moisture bearing capacity, they can get about 30% of that water down to about the 70% mark. And this depends, of course, on soil structure and clay type and so forth. But as a general rule, 65 to 70% is a very safe number. When the moisture content gets below 65%, the water that is remaining in the soil is so tightly held and adsorbed to the soil colloids and to the soil aggregates that the plant roots and the root hairs by themselves cannot extract it. However, biology, fungi, especially mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria, can still get access to that water, use it to build their own bodies, and actually not only use it to build their own bodies, but also transfer it directly to plant roots. Mycorrhizal fungi are especially well documented in serving this function. So not only do biology have the capacity to provide nutrition, but they can also provide moisture in very low moisture conditions. So they have the capacity, mycorrhizal fungi actually have the capacity to get water out of the soil aggregate crumb structure down to about 25 to 30% moisture content versus plant root hairs at about 65 to 70%. Significant difference. So plants can continue to get water for a much longer period. It's a very key point. So if we look at this overall system and how we can get this system to function on our own farms, we have this overall three-part system that I refer to as the biosystem. And there's basically two drivers of this system. Plants can drive this system and soil can drive this system. And both of them this overall system can really turn in two very different directions. The first, and this is how the majority of agriculture is functioning today, is that it can be turning in an overall degrading cycle. And in a degrading cycle, what is happening here is that starting with the plants, always starts with the plants. The plants are not healthy. They're not photosynthesizing efficiently. So since photosynthesis is suffering, the plant doesn't have a lot of sugars, doesn't have a lot of surplus energy, so it sends a lot fewer sugars down into the root system as root exudates. Therefore, the soil microbiology isn't functioning as it could and as it should. So it is not releasing minerals to be made available to the plant. And now the plant becomes even unhealthier. So in this degrading cycle, the overall cycle is running in reverse, where it's continually, the soil health, the plant health is continually degrading and becoming worse and worse and worse. And unfortunately, the majority of our agricultural systems today are functioning in this cycle. However, if the system can run in this direction, then it must be true that it can also run in the opposite direction. And in this cycle, we have a regenerating cycle. So in the regenerational cycle, what we have functioning here is that plants are extremely healthy. They are photosynthesizing very efficiently. They're producing more energy, more sugars than they need for themselves. So they begin sending a lot of this sugar up to the 70% mark down into the root system as root exudates. As these root exudates are released, soil microbiology begins digesting them, begins extracting nutrients from the soil and making them available to the plant, and now the plant becomes even healthier. So in this cycle, both soils and plants are becoming healthier and healthier and healthier all the time. And this is a very real possibility where both soils and plants can continually improve. As farmers and food producers, our responsibility is to manage this system, and we have two different impact points at which we can manage this system. We can work with plants or we can work with soils. Ideally, we need to work with both. And as we work with both of these to improve the overall system, it's basically we are managing those two pieces to either continually improve or to continually degrade. It's completely dependent on our management systems and the decisions we make as managers. So if we work with the two different impact points, the first is the plant drive. The plant drive is a much larger driver of the system. It takes fewer RPM to get the system to moving at optimum speed. It takes less horsepower. And it will automatically increase throughout the entire growing season. As the plant's nutritional requirements increase, the photosynthetic factory increases as well. So the plant drive is how the system was naturally intended to function, that we really focus on driving that system, driving the plants, and they will accelerate the overall system. The soil drive is a much smaller drive. It has a lower efficiency and it takes more input, more energy input to get the system moving than the plant drive does. So this is why on plants, because of their nonlinear effects, their compounding effects, we can put in ounces or pints or quarts of material per acre and get a very strong plant response and a very strong system response. Whereas when we are working with the soil drive, we are typically talking about applying hundreds of pounds or even tons of material in the case of limestone and manure and so forth to increase that system's performance. So it is typically much more energy efficient to work with the plant drive, but the reality is that we need to work with both. We've many times heard the analogy that the inputs that we're using are tools in a toolbox. And I'd like to change that conversation a little bit to begin thinking of these materials as tools in two different toolboxes, where not only do we have both a plant toolbox and we have a soil toolbox. And the two function very differently. They do very different things, and yet they do the same thing. The key is that all the inputs that we use must enhance both sides of the cycle. Many materials that are out there today there's many materials that are fertilizers, there's some that are biostimulants, but there are very few that do both. One common problem that we have today is that many materials will enhance one side of the system, but they suppress the other side, resulting in a net negative. So let's use a fertilizer. Let's use a nitrogen application as an example. A nitrogen application applied to the soil will have the effect of enhancing plant growth, but at the same time, it is also suppressing soil. And that suppression will result in an overall net negative. We need to use materials that both enhance plants and enhance soils at the same time. The solution really is to enhance both of those cycles so that we have a regenerative cycle. And as that cycle begins regenerating, quality goes up significantly, and you can't stop. When quality goes up, you can't stop yield from happening. Yields will significantly increase as well. So I'll provide us with one example of this, and then I'll open it for questions. This is So when we look at what the possibilities are in terms of natural drought resistance, this is one example of a farm that we worked with this last year in south central Indiana. bioenergetic harmonics from Atlanta, Indiana. This farm has been organically certified since 2001, has been growing row crops, being corn, tofu bean, blue corn, blue food grade corn, tofu beans, spelts, and I'm missing one, but I can't think what it is right now. One other crop as well since 2008. So what we learned on this farm this last year is that providing adequate plant nutrition plus good soil biology can most definitely produce significant drought resistance. So this photo was taken at the end of July, I believe on July 28th, if I'm not mistaken. And at this period, they had right at, let me see, July 28th. This was right at the end of a 10-day period where we had 100, this farm experienced 100 plus degree temperatures, anywhere from 103 to 108 degree temperatures, 10 consecutive days in a row. And this specific photo was taken on the 10th day of that heat period. They had also had, in this region, as many of you know, we had a major drought stress. We had 0.6 of an inch of rainfall from the 1st of May through the latter part of July. I forget the exact date. 0.6 of an inch of rain. So we had major drought stress, very low moisture, very high temperatures. And as you can see, this corn is definitely showing some heat stress. We see a slight curling and rolling of the leaves, nothing severe, but you can definitely see that it is beginning to be stressed. However, if you, from where this photo was taken, if we do simply a 90-degree turn, we look at the field across the road. Okay, so this is, 0.6 of an inch of rain. The regional harvest average on corn, this was conventional field corn, was 40 to 60 bushels per acre. So this is the photo that we were looking at. If we do a 90-degree angle from this photo, this is what the field looked like across the road. So significant drought stress. A lot of rolling, looks almost like a field of pineapples. So this corn did very well. This corn is known, this specific blue variety is known to be a fairly low yielding variety, typically doing 95 to 100 bushel per acre. This farm has done a little bit better than that. They're consistently doing, for the last 5 years, they've done about 108 to 110 bushel per acre. The best this variety was ever known to do was in California under irrigation at 174 bushels per acre. This last year, however, 2012, which was the very first year this farm was using our nutritional program, they produced 170 bushel per acre, even in the drought stress. So we enabled those plants to have significant resistance or tolerance of the drought because they had good nutrition. We did nothing more. We simply provided good nutrition. And that was the foundation. 2008 to 2011 average test weight. And then as you can see, the 2012 test weight was at 59.1 pounds per bushel, and adjusted it was actually 61.2 if I'm not mistaken. So we had, not only did we have yields, but we had very high quality. As I commented earlier, if you increase quality, you can't stop the quantity, you can't stop the yields from happening. We also had an organic test plot on the same farm with Great Harvest organic soybeans. And as you can see, this photo I think was taken a little bit later. Have very healthy, high vitality soybeans in spite of the drought conditions. And the yield in 2012 was 61 bushels per acre, which is significantly more than the regional average of 25 to 40 bushels per acre. So the question then becomes, is how can this work on your farm, and how can we put it into place? The reality is that we've known for a long time, had the understanding that healthy soils can produce healthy plants. And our contention is that if that is true, then not only can healthy soils produce healthy plants, but the reverse must also be true, that healthy plants can produce healthy soils. And what we're basically saying is, by working with that plant drive, using foliar applications, providing good plant nutrition, putting together a complete system of plant nutrition, including both the plant drive and the soil drive, can help you produce plants that have a very high level of vitality and energy. The key on many farms is that mineral nutrition is the biggest limiting factor. It's not genetics. Many times it's not moisture. It's mineral nutrition. If biology drives, so as I described, biology really drives plant nutrition, and photosynthesis drives biology. So if we want to enhance soils, then we also need to work with enhancing plants. What this looks like is that photosynthesis drives biology, which drives better mineral nutrition, which then drives even better photosynthesis. And this is how the overall cycle continues to improve and get better and better and better. The reality is that we're only scratching the surface of what the potentials and the opportunities are in working with plant health and yield potential. I've said many times that I don't believe we really know what healthy plants actually look like anymore. We have some field experiences of producing such healthy, high quality crops with such a tremendous vitality that I am persuaded that we're routinely only harvesting a very small percentage of our crop's genetic potential, and that we also don't know what healthy plants look like anymore. A healthy plant frame and production looks very different from what could be defined as normal, what we see every day as routine. The reality is that we can change soils very quickly, and we can change soils faster by working with plants than we can by working with soils in many cases, by working with the soils directly in many cases, because the plants send such tremendous amounts of sugars and biomass down into the soil system. So by enhancing photosynthesis, we can really accelerate that soil quality improvement. This is actually on the same farm that the blue corn was on. This was the field of tofu beans. This root system that you're looking at, they grew a cover crop of oats early in the spring, and then that cover crop was incorporated before it was planted into beans. This particular oat plant survived and was growing as a weed, so that when they went to pull it out, this is what the root system looked like. So we basically have each root is coated with soil aggregates, very strong soil crumb structure. And the farm owner, Marita Pickett, told us in her own words, she said that I have lived on this farm for 62 years and I have never once seen that. And so that is really the capacity that we have to accelerate soil health by working with plant health. It's very profound. So how can we help at advancing eco-agriculture? The work that we do is really we provide consulting services and information, and we help farmers evaluate what is happening on their farm, what you can do to improve your system, and what your missing links are, how you can improve the overall system's performance, where the weak links are. And also we design schedules for making sure that we have complete plant nutrition throughout the entire growing season to fit the crops that you're growing and their specific critical points of influence. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll just open it for any thoughts or questions or comments that you might have.
John, can you hear me now?
Yes, David, got you.
All right, good. I'm sorry, I had it myself unmuted. So thank you very much, John. I am unmuting everyone. So if you have questions, just go ahead and ask the question. And if you don't have a question, actually, if you can raise your hand on the right side, you can raise your hand if you have a question, and I will unmute you. That way, we don't get a bunch of background noise. Well, you've done a great job, John. There's no questions today.
Yeah, this is great. Everyone has it all figured out. Oh, we do have one hand in the air, David.
We've got a couple minutes here. I would like if you would touch just a bit on, especially potassium. I know becomes very unavailable in dry soils. Can you talk just a little bit about how we can have nutrients more available even in drier soils?
That's a very good question, David. I think, I don't just think, I know that the real key to nutrient availability, I talked a little bit about moisture availability and its dependence on soil biology. Basically, soil biology can get, for all intents and purposes, they can get 3 times as much moisture as plants can in 3 times drier conditions. The same holds true of nutrients: calcium, potassium, magnesium, trace minerals. They can get those nutrients when the soil is much drier. Did we have someone wanting to ask a question?
Yep. Yes, we do. We've got Glenn Gall. Go ahead.
Hi, John. Hi, David. My question has to do with an existing field that was cropped in soybeans and is now fallow. And how can we get this kind of effect and get it rejuvenated quickly, so that we can grow, well, what part of it pastures, part of it hay, and part of it field crops.
Very good question. So the short answer is that, okay, I'll use the blue corn farm, bioenergetic harmonics, as an example. This last year, the 2012 growing season, was the very first year that we had worked with them. So what we did on that farm was simply, we came in the spring and we put on a strong microbial stimulant to enhance soil health. And then we simply applied strong mineral nutritional supplements at starting as a row starter and 3 different foliar applications on the corn. So what we did was, in reality, we didn't do a lot of work. We didn't do any work to speak of in enhancing soil. We simply worked on enhancing those plants and making sure that they had good nutrition at the critical points of influence. And we can do the same on soybeans or any other crop, and you'll see significant responses on soil health as well.
Okay. Now, okay, this was not an organic farm. It was pretty much the soil has been wasted. So, would that change things somewhat? I'm not expecting much of a soil food web to be there.
It will change things a little bit and potentially reduce the very strong initial response that we got on this farm, but the overall net effect will still be there. You should still be able to get a very strong response.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
John, I have another question that came in. Is the relationship between the microorganisms in the soil shared in real time, or is it after the microbial organisms die that the secondary metabolites are something?
Okay, I think I understand the question. So is it, I think the question is it in real time or is it a delayed response from when the plants can absorb it? David, can you get the others out? There's quite a bit of background noise.
Yes, I will do that.
Thanks. So, okay, good. That was the right question. All right, so is the response in real time or is it a delayed response? It's actually, for all intents and purposes, it's a real-time response. And the reason is that most of not all, but the majority of the exudates that the plant roots are sending out are digested by bacteria. And the bacterial digestion process, which is referred to as mineralization, what basically happens is that bacterial generations cycle very quickly, where essentially you have a new bacterial generation every 20 minutes. And so in that generational cycling process, the root exudates that are absorbed are cycled through those bacterial bodies, and 20 minutes later, the nutrients that have been extracted from the soil system could theoretically be then released back for the plant roots to absorb. Does it actually happen that quickly? No, not 100%. Not 100% of the nutrients will be released for those plant roots that quickly. However, many will be. So practically speaking, for all intents and purposes, it's very close to a real-time response where we have maybe a total of a 20-minute to an hour and 30 minutes or total of 90-minute spread between when sugars are released and nutrients, and the nutrients released that resulted in is back available for the plants. So it's, for all intents and purposes, a real-time result.
Great question. Great answer. I have another question here. Do you have more data on soybeans? Howard, do you have more details in exactly what data you're looking for?
We have some limited data on soybeans, not as much as we do on corn, but essentially soybeans have a slightly different root system from what corn does, and they are even more biologically dependent than corn is. So if we can ensure that we have a strong root system on soybeans and a strong microbial digestive system, my expectation would be that we'll actually get a stronger response on soybeans than we will on corn, unless we're using genetically modified varieties that don't have a root system to absorb the nutrients that we put down there. So we should get a similar or even a stronger response.
Good. I think we've got all the questions that are here. We are at 10 o'clock, and so we will be closing up the call. Again, I thank you, John, and thank you all for being with us today. Hope that you found significant value in this online event and that you're already able to see how John's practices and his products that he's developed are going to, how they can positively impact your farm. So, as I mentioned earlier, our mission is to help you grow the highest quality food for yourself and for your neighbors. And neighbors are anybody who eats your food, really. So if you'd like to take the next steps and get connected with Advancing Eco Agriculture and have one of our consultants visit your farm, please send me an email. Send it to the email on the screen, bmiller@advancingecoag.com. Give me a call, whatever works best for you. But if you sent me an email by noon today, I will be sure to respond by the end of the day, which, if you see my inbox, is quite a commitment. But if you put "Let's Connect" in the subject line, put "Let's Connect," and send me an email by noon, and I will respond to you before the end of the day today. You will also be receiving a survey on this call. We're constantly trying to improve. Our goal is to never be good enough, never be satisfied, but to always continually challenge the status quo and to move forward. And so there will be a short survey. We ask that you would take a couple minutes to fill it out and send it back to us. The feedback is very important for us to improve upon, because if we don't know what you need and what you want, then we will have no means of moving in that direction. We want to invite all of you to the webinar for next week. I think you'll be getting an invitation for that. And last but not least, when you registered, you should have seen on the website that the first 25 people get a chance to win a tissue analysis, and the winner this week is Tom Gibson. So congratulations, Tom. You will be receiving a free tissue analysis and a consultation on how to improve plant health. So all of you others, invite your friends or be back next week and be one of the first 25. So Tom, I saw your name on the call. You will be expect an email from us with a soil or a tissue analysis request form and instructions on how to take a tissue analysis, and use that whenever you have plants that you would like to have tested. And thank you for being with us today. So we wish all of you a wonderful day. Many blessings. We're going to wrap up the call and look forward to growing the healthiest crops together. All of you be well, and we'll be in touch. Have a good day.